The rain came down like 1,000 little nails, tapping every surface of the abandoned district until the rhythm felt like a heartbeat. It made the empty office towers look as though they were breathing in the dark. On the far side of the site, beyond a chest-high wall of rebar and stacked plywood, a concrete mixing drum turned slowly, powered by a generator that grumbled as if it were tired of being brave. Gabe Rook pulled up the hood of his rain shell and stood there a moment, listening to the water. The jacket had been high-vis once. Now the reflective stripes were scuffed dull by years of weather and work. 67 and still not good at quitting, he liked to say. His knee popped when he stepped off the slab and into the wash of mud below. He set the head of his sledgehammer into the muck to steady himself. "Pump 3's cavitating again," came Tamsin's voice over the handheld radio clipped to his vest. The young apprentice sounded small under the rainfall. "I can hear it from the trailer. You want me to kick the bypass or—" "Leave it," Gabe said, and the sledgehammer handle was warm where the skin of his palm found it. "She'll spit out the bubbles once the head pressure settles. You staying dry?" "Dryish," Tamsin said. "Noah's asleep." Gabe smiled. Tamsin was 20, wiry, way too smart to have fallen into construction, but here she was because people like Gabe always needed people like Tamsin, someone with newer bones and newer software, and the patience to teach him just enough not to break what she had fixed. Noah was her 8-year-old brother, a quiet kid whose eyes seemed to hold 3 answers for every one question. There had been a shelter scheduled to take them, but then the survey spires rose out of the riverbed, alien needles taller than the towers, and after that nothing went on schedule. "Keep him asleep," Gabe said. "If you hear anything that doesn't sound like rain or a generator, you call me." The radio went quiet. The rain turned louder and then, beneath it, there came a sound he had not heard in weeks, a long, thrumming groan, as if the city itself were stretching in its sleep. He knew that sound. It wasn't rebar singing in concrete or sheet metal complaining at a wind gust. It came from below, a seismic throat clearing. The first time he'd felt it, the spires had been newborns, a web of gleaming geometry stitching itself into the river. The aliens, whoever they were, never showed their faces, only their math and their machines. The surveyors, the news had called them, and then stopped calling them anything when the cameras went dark and the evacuation buses left for the dry hills. Gabe set off across the site, boots sinking to the ankles and pulling free with wet sighs. The light towers threw comma-shaped halos into the rain. Rows of caged rebar thread rose like iron reeds out of spread footings. The crane stood polite and still, boom tips vanishing into low cloud. He knew every piece of it, every run of conduit and sling and ratty strap. He had been building structures since he was 16, when Old Man Rook had first put the sledgehammer in his hand and said, "You don't hit with your arms, you hit with your hips. The swing starts in your feet." The groan came again. It arrived from the far side of the barricade, where the unfinished roadway sloped down into a cut through the shale, a scar carved for the new interchange that would never be. Down there, where the standing water lay black and motionless between ranks of new storm drains, the survey spire's glow bled through the rain, a sick orange pulse that rolled like distant lightning. Gabe climbed the barrier and dropped to the other side. The sledgehammer bounced on his shoulder, as familiar as the ache at the base of his thumb. He followed the slope down. "Foreman," Tamsin's voice again smaller, "you feel that?" "I feel it," he said. "You promised you, stay clear of the spire field." "I promised I'd keep the pumps running so the basements don't flood out," he said. "That's what I'm doing. Go easy on the promise accounting." Another groan. The water on his right bubbled as if exhaling. The orange pulse deepened, and the rain twisted into new patterns around something tall that rose up out of the standing water like an island that had decided it had been under long enough. Gabe stopped walking. He'd seen the surveyor's drones before, sleek reflective things that stalked air like osprey and never got wet even when it was raining. He'd seen the small ones that roamed the steel skeletons and sniffed welds. But this was new. It towered over the cut's edge, bigger than the site trailers, bigger than the boom truck they had left behind. It was shaped like a beast that had never seen Earth and tried anyway, a hunched, broad-shouldered thing with a tapered skull and hands like excavator claws. Its hide was a map of basalt plates, each one edged in beads of orange. Everywhere the plates met, thin seams glimmered like the cracks within cooling lava. The monster opened its mouth, and light pushed out through its teeth. The light wasn't a heat that burned. It was a mathematical heat, the kind that made the air hum in surprised chords. Gabe breathed out once. "Well," he said to no one. The radio whispered, "Gabe. Stay in the trailer," he said. "Keep Noah asleep. If you hear me say drop load, count to 5 and hit the big red button on the hoist control." "Why, what's—" "Just do it." The beast turned. Its viewports, if that's what the holes were, found him. There was no mask of animal hostility there. No anger, only a mechanical curiosity. It stepped onto the slope. Basalt plates slid over one another with a grinding that made Gabe's molars ache. The claws of its left hand sank into the wet shale and came up wet and black. He swung the sledge off his shoulder, not in anger but the way a carpenter opens a tape measure. A memory flashed, himself, 30 years younger, showing a new guy how you check form ties on a plywood wall. "Think about the path the force wants to travel," he'd said. "Then don't be there when it arrives." The beast moved. Not fast, not slow. It put its weight into the slope and came down the cut, head lowered. The orange seams between its plates pulsed brighter and the rain hissed where it touched them. Gabe backed up, step for step, until his boot kissed a row of dowels protruding from a fresh slab. He could be careful. Careful was good, but careful wouldn't keep Tamsin and Noah safe if the thing got curious about the trailer. Sometimes the most careful thing was also a little loud. "Hey, Rockpile," he said, as if speaking to a stubborn backhoe. "Let's take this somewhere with more room." He turned and trotted along the slab's edge, crossing under the low boom of the nearest crane. His knee complained, then shut up when it realized complaining wouldn't change anything. The monster followed. As it moved through the downpour, it cast sparks, not fire, but bright points where rain met seam and canceled into light. It was beautiful, he had to admit, in the same way a new bridge is beautiful when you haven't seen the bid change orders yet. Ahead, the yard opened into what had been the staging area. Steel lay in orderly stacks. A half-built culvert formed a shallow concrete tunnel open at both ends. Beyond the culvert, a hill of aggregate rose in the rain, a pile of gray marbles that turned darker when water soaked them. Gabe jogged toward the culvert and let himself slow to a fast walk. He timed his breath. He had learned to breathe through ladders, through tight spaces, through that long stretch between the rebar cage climbing and the concrete trucks arriving. He breathed now and slid into the culvert, sledge hammering the air before him to hear the changes in sound. The tunnel would amplify. The tunnel would echo. The tunnel would give him what he needed. He reached the far end and stepped clear. The monster bent, then folded down to look inside. Its mouth light brightened. It placed its hand at the culvert's entrance, claws splayed, the basalt plates of its wrist meeting at tidy weld lines. Gabe planted his boots, turned his hips, and dropped the sledge through a tight arc, the way Old Man Rook had taught him. The hammerhead met the seam where wrist plates came together and rang like struck stone. The sound went into the culvert and came back fatter, a booming second note that made the rain jump. The monster jerked its hand away. The orange seam where the hammer had kissed it flashed white. A hairline crack spidered through the plate. Not much, but a start. "Okay," Gabe said. He felt it in his palm, the sledge's gentle complaint. "You hit something harder than me." He shifted his grip a notch and returned to the culvert mouth. The beast did exactly what he was counting on. Curious, it offered the same hand again, though now the wrist plates overlapped differently, defense shifting like scales. It placed the weight of its fingers into the concrete. Its head tilted, trying to see around its own hand. It was smart enough to examine. It was not yet smart enough to be superstitious. Gabe swung again. Hammer, hips, rain. This time he didn't aim for the old scar, he aimed for the new joint, the edge where one plate tucked under another. The sound went harder into the culvert. It came back a deeper boom. The seam flare went white again and grit shook loose. Some of that grit glowed briefly, then faded like cooling embers. The monster pulled back and made a noise that wasn't a roar. It was the sound of a quarry drill changing bit sizes, a mechanical whine that implied it was shifting strategies. It moved its other hand forward. "That's the spirit," Gabe said. "He hit that one too." By the time it thought to try its foot, he had learned. The seams at the wrist weren't just joints, they were waveguides, channels. The culvert shaped and fed the vibration. The rain did the rest, coupling trebles into bass. He didn't need to smash anything. He needed only to ring it to find the structure's natural hum and persuade it to hum itself apart. Behind him the crane waited, boom angled like a question. The hook hung heavy with a spreader bar, a steel rectangle as long as a pickup truck. Months ago, Gabe had fabricated that spreader himself when the manufacturer sent one that was an inch off spec and then said, "Well, close enough." Close enough was how you got a slab that faulted and a beam that crept and a life that buckled under load. Gabe never liked close enough. He pulled the radio. "Tamsin, you still good?" "I'm watching your vitals on the site cams," she said, voice trembling a little because she was trying not to say what she was seeing. "That things are those plates, is it?" "It's a machine that thinks it's a mountain," Gabe said. He breathed. The machine heard breath maybe, its head twitched. "Do you have the hoist control?" "I'm on it." "You're going to hear me say drop load. Count 5, not 3, not 7, 5, hit the red." "You said 5 earlier." "Promises kept." He hung the radio and walked, slow and deliberate, out from the culvert. The monster followed him with its head. The rain sheeted off its shoulders. Where the water struck the bright seams, steam winked and vanished. The trucks at the edge of the yard, abandoned when the evacuation order came, stood like nervous cattle. Gabe moved under the crane's hook. He planted his boots. He set the sledge's head down on the wet slab as if he were a drummer pausing to taste the room. The monster stepped forward. Its wrist seemed still twitched with white lines of stress. The light in its mouth had banked, as if concentrating. "Come on," Gabe said softly. "Follow the load path." It lunged. Not a big pounce, not a cinematic leap, just a quick forward and down that brought its right arm in a straight line toward him. The claws were not teeth. The claws were tools. Gabe didn't try to dodge. He was too old for dodges that relied on luck. He had already measured his escape route with his eyes. He waited until the claws found the spreader. The 4-inch thick steel bar hit the monster's knuckles and the whole crane sang from tip to turntable. In the vibrational map of the world, a new mountain had just struck a bell. "Drop load," he said into the radio. His voice was very calm. The monster lifted the spreader with the tips of its claws. The crane hoist line groaned. Gabe counted in his head the same way he had counted crews into safety. 1, 2, 3, 4. He stepped left 5. The load released. The spreader fell like a certainty. It landed square across the beast's forearm at the wrist, precisely where fractures glittered beneath the rain. The sound that came out of the crane's bellied steel was the sound a cathedral might make if you struck it with God's tuning fork. The seam went to pure white. The plates parted. The monster snatched its hand back, but it left the thumb behind. Not blood, just rock turning into shrapnel. The flying shards were bright for a heartbeat, then winked down to rain-washed pebbles. Gabe already had the sledge up. He didn't swing wildly. With careful, measured control, he brought the hammer down onto the spreader to send the echo into the culvert, back into the beast, and through the newly opened channel. The monster jerked, as if it had discovered what nerves were. The rain swallowed the bright dust and laid it down like glitter on black water. The monster made the quarry drill sound again, higher now. It wasn't pain, it was analysis. This thing had a logic inside it. Fine, Gabe thought. So did he. His logic had more knee aches but way better taste in coffee. It stepped back, thinking, looking around. Splashes of light pulsed along its shoulders, like a system tracing options. It turned its head toward the river, where the nearest survey spire rose and mapped rain into equations. "Don't even think about it," Gabe said. "You and me started this dance." He walked forward just enough to get the machine's attention. He swung the sledge once, not at the monster but into empty air. An invitation. The machine took it. It stepped into the yard, away from the cut, curious enough to follow this very small thing that had managed to ring it like a chime. Gabe backed between stacks of rebar cages. He moved with that old job site confidence, the graceless rhythm of a man who has carried 50-pound bags of cement far enough to know you don't carry them farther than you must. He kept the stacks between him and the machine's main mass to cut the direct line for its claws. He kept the culvert within earshot because he wanted that second note. He kept the crane nearby for a future he hadn't quite imagined yet. Above the rain and the generator and the long voice of the city came a new sound, a tone that wasn't the monster's hum. It skated down from the clouds like a needle being lowered onto a record. The survey spire's light brightened. The tone took on timbre. A voice in his head and not in his ear. "Human Foreman, stand still." Gabe froze because that was the point of the order, and the point of knowing a point is knowing you don't have to obey it. He blinked. The voice was clear, without accent, without attitude. He could have imagined it, but it had a weight ideas don't usually carry. It felt like being under a falling object and having just enough time to decide whether to move. "Working," Gabe muttered under his breath. "Come back later." "You are not scheduled," said the voice. "This zone is under environmental transformation. Your activity adds noise to our map." "Noise is how you learn a room," he said, softly enough that if the voice were coming from ears it wouldn't hear. He pulled out the radio. "You get any of that?" "Nothing on the RF," Tamsin said. "You talking to me or?" "Just keeping count," Gabe said. The monster was reconsidering the rebar stacks. It lifted one claw and tapped the bars with meticulous curiosity. The sound was pure metal, weirdly delicate. "Hey, Rockbull," Gabe called. "Ever tie one of these?" "No, me neither. I don't tie, I swing." "Human Foreman," the voice said again, "cease." "Gonna have to overrule you," Gabe said. And the way he said it was exactly how he told a developer that the schedule wasn't a wish list. He moved, not away this time but across, angling the rebar stacks so the monster would have to follow him to keep a clear line. He would need a bigger hammer soon, and he didn't have a bigger hammer, but he had the suggestion of one. He had something that could hold a load and then release it all at once. A pre-stressed tendon, half-jacked and ready from the last pour, a cable thick as his thumb, threaded through ducts that ran the length of the test slab. He had left it under tension, not dangerous but awake. He loped toward it, ignoring his knee's complaint. The tendon glinted dull in the rain. The hydraulic jack sat at the slab's end like a squat frog. He reached the jack and thumbed the bleeder valve shut. The gauge needle quivered and stepped up. Nothing violent, just pressure, like biting into a slightly too crisp apple. The monster stepped carefully around the rebar stacks and put its hand down near the tendon anchor. It bent low to see the cable where it exited the duct. It was learning. It had learned enough to suspect that the small, hard things the human relied on were up to something. Its mouth light dimmed as if it were redirecting its attention to sensing, to mapping. The rain ran off the ridge of its skull in clean lines. Gabe took a breath and set his feet. He had sunk form stakes in wind. He had ridden hanging scaffolds until his calves screamed. He had picked up the phone when men were hurt and he had spoken to wives and he had not lied. He knew how to do a thing when it needed doing. He swung the sledge and hit the anchor plate. The tendon sang. The machine put its claws down, heavy, heavy, on the slab to meet the note. The tendon's pitch climbed as the jack took more load. Not too much, not to breaking. He didn't want to let go like a whip. He wanted resonance, not explosion. He struck the plate again. The tendon sang higher. The monster tilted its head. The seams along its forearm brightened. "Human Foreman," said the voice, as if this were a polite chat and not a rainy argument between a man and a mountain. "We are the cartographers of the Vesh array. Your planet is being indexed. This Sentinel was deployed because your industrial terrain presented hostile harmonics." Gabe snorted. "Hostile harmonics, it's called a job site. Its purpose is to damp your noise." Gabe planted his boots and thought about dampers, about how you hang tuned mass on a skyscraper to keep it from swaying, about how you add rubber bearings to a bridge so the earth can shrug and the bridge won't break. He thought about the cheap dampers he'd refused to install on the tower 3 blocks from here. He thought about the email he had written that started, "If you build it like this, the wind will sing through it." The sledge rose, the sledge fell. The tendon cried a high note that skated along the rain like a perfectly thrown rock skimming a lake. The monster pressed closer, fascinated and cautious both. Gabe thumbed the valve open. The jack let go. The tendon went to the note it wanted all along, a clear, hungry tone that rolled under the slab and into the ducts and through the anchor and into the cable and up into the air. It went into the monster's hand and made the plates shiver. He hit the anchor once more, not hard but precisely, adjusting the note the way he would tune a guitar he didn't own. Inside the monster, something aligned. Gabe felt it like a shift in gravity. The seams along its wrist and elbow flared so bright the rain turned to steam before it reached them. The plates moved not like scales now but like a shutter. Beneath, for the first time, Gabe saw a glow that wasn't in the seams, an amber heart, not a soft organic thing but a chamber the machine kept for its math. "Okay," Gabe breathed, "there you are." He didn't try for hero moves. There was no jump, no slow motion. He walked forward and, because it was ridiculously heavy, dragged the spreader bar into place, setting it on the slab edge like a steel anvil. He lifted the sledge, found the weight shift and brought the head down against the bar's corner at a shallow angle, sending the force along the line of the tendon's dominant frequency into the open shutter of the machine's wrist. The sound that came back was beautiful. It was the sound a city makes when 100 acetate records spin in perfect sync. It was the sound of a problem admitting it had been solved. The machine's plates opened a fraction more. The amber heart inside, the chamber, the math, flickered in a pattern that his mind wanted to turn into Morse code. Rain hit it and sprang away, as silver needles of steam. "Gabe," Tamsin said in his ear, "Noah's awake. He's watching the cameras. He says you're playing it like a drum. Tell him it's a very big drum." "What do you want me to do?" "Be ready to hit the pump shutdown in case the river rises. And if this thing drops, I need you to bring the truck around. We might have to move its pieces before somebody comes to collect receipts." He lifted the sledge and swung once more. The machine reacted this time. It learned. It pulled back its hand and turned the other, not to strike but to scoop. The claws came toward him, and the crane's hook swung wildly from the vibration still echoing in the steel. Gabe stepped back and his heels skidded on a slick patch of paste. The world tilted for one brief stupid second, the kind your life can fit through if it wants out. His knee tried to fold and didn't. He caught himself on the spreader bar. The sledge's head kissed the slab and sparked. The claw stopped a foot from his chest, not for mercy, for calculation. It suspended there, massive and clean basalt plates flickering along their seams, rain running in small rivulets over the geometry. The mouth light dimmed. The amber heart pulsed. "You have found our resonance," said the voice in his head. "You are an unmodeled variable." "Story of my life," Gabe said. His breath fogged. He took another step backward. "Stand still," the voice said again, not like an order now but like the solution to a proof. "We can remove you and continue our index." Anyone ever tell you the problem with your plan? Gabe said. You built a damper for a thing you don't understand, but we built the thing you're trying to damp. You built the city, the iron, the concrete, the singing steel. We built it loud. He didn't raise his voice. We know where it wants to hum. The machine shifted its hand. The shutter plates began to close. Gabe didn't pretend he had a grand vision. He simply did what the moment asked for. He lifted the sledge with both hands, not showy, not brave, and he swung it with his hips, turning through the knees, sending the head into the same spreader bar corner, but at an angle that made the note slide rather than shout. The wrist shutter paused. He swung again with the opposite stance, his left foot forward now, finding the counter frequency the way you find the second stair on a staircase in the dark. The shutter opened. Gabe brought the hammer down on the anchor plate like a punctuation mark. The tendon sang pure. He reached into the wrist with the next stroke and struck not the plates but the ring inside, the one that looked too smooth and too vulnerable to be structural. The blow wasn't heavy. He didn't have to be. The machine had opened its own gates. The ring cracked. The amber heart flared once, not out of pain but out of release, like a breaker popping to protect the panel. The machine went still. The rain continued, as if it had all been rain. The light in the seams dimmed until it was an afterimage. The glow in the mouth receded into the throat. The claws lowered to the slab, gentle now, as if the machine were laying down tools at the end of a shift. "Human Foreman," the voice said, "you have collapsed Sentinel's phase lock." "Yeah," Gabe said, and he wasn't unkind. He was tired. "You built it to absorb what we put out. You forgot we can put out more than one thing at once." "You will accept compensation," the voice said. "We will remove this Sentinel and restore your damaged industrial terrain." Gabe looked around. The yard was a mess, but it was the same mess it had been, only wetter and more honest. The culvert shone under the light towers like the throat of a giant organ. The crane's hook swung one last slow arc and went still. The spreader bar steamed. He wanted to ask for his men back, the ones whose names he still carried and would carry, the ones who had been on other jobs in other storms that had nothing alien about them at all. But even if the cartographers could do that, it wouldn't fix the thing that needed fixing. "You want to understand us," he said, out loud because the words needed air. "Help me finish what you interrupted." "Specify." "Let the river stay in its banks," Gabe said. "Let the basements drain. Let the pumps keep running. Leave the city alone long enough for us to shore it up. Your city is a source of harmonic noise that limits the fidelity of our map," the voice said. "You've got a sturdy map already," Gabe said. "You can wait. We don't need forever. We just need enough." There was a long hush then, not silence, because there was rain and generator and the soft tick of cooling steel. It was a hush like the pause before an inspector stamps the final page of a permit. "We will consider," the voice said. "You do that." The amber in the machine's throat brightened once like a pilot light catching, then went out. The seams lost their last ember. The monster's shape did not collapse, it simply became sculpture. It was 1,000 good foundation stones arranged into a creature nobody had asked for. "Gabe," Tamsin's voice was very small. "Are you okay?" He leaned on the sledge and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids he could still see the machine's shutter opening, the right angle of his hammer swing, the precise echo the culvert had given him. He could see Old Man Rook's hands shaping the swing in the air. He could hear the laughter of a crew after a pour goes right and nothing needs fixing. "Yeah," he said, "I think we're okay." Noah's voice came onto the radio, shy and bright. "You hit it like a bell." "I did," Gabe said. "It was a big bell, but bells are only bells when you have people to listen." The cartographers did not answer again that night. The rain slowed. The generators droned their stubborn song. Tamsin brought the pickup around and the three of them, old foreman, young apprentice, quiet kid, stood and looked at the machine that had become a statue. "What do we do with it?" Tamsin asked. "We incorporate," Gabe said softly and chuckled at himself. "We make it a feature. We'll call it the Basalt Guardian. Put a plaque. Stopped here by a foreman with a very good hammer and a better apprentice." She punched his shoulder lightly. "You're impossible." "Sure," he said, "but so is the work until it's done." They slept a few hours in the trailer with the heater turned low and the door latched because you never knew what might decide to be curious in the night. He dreamed that he was young and his father's hand was on his shoulder, guiding his hips through the motion of a swing that would one day save a city. When the morning broke, the sky was a bright gray bowl and the survey spires were pale in the distance, their orange lights faint as if embarrassed the sun had returned to work. The machine statue stood exactly where they had left it. The culvert looked like a clean, safe tunnel waiting for water it could carry away without drama. Gabe and Tamsin checked the pumps first. They felt like doctors on rounds, pressing their stethoscopes to the metal and listening for murmurs. The water level in the pit had fallen overnight. The river had not come into the basements like an uninvited guest. They walked the length of the yard. Feeder cables lay like snakes in the mud. A pallet of grout mix had given up and turned to gray oatmeal. The crane turned lazily in the morning breeze until the operator's cab faced the yard, as if it were watching over them. They almost missed the drone. It was small, no bigger than a gull, and it maintained a courteous distance above head height. It glowed not orange but a gentle sky blue at the seams where its plates met. When it spoke, it did so through a thin speaker grid on its underside, not in their heads. "Human Foreman Gabe Rook," it said in a voice shaped to be comforting and very definitely a little awkward. "Apprentice Tamsin Ortiz, Minor Noah Ortiz." The three of them stood, hands in pockets or on hips, because there was no sense pretending a drone couldn't see your hands. "We are the cartographers," said the drone. "We do not present faces, we present decisions. Our decision is this: your city may hum, your pumps may run, your structures may sing. We will not index zones where your harmonics exceed our tolerances. We request a schedule, we request a map of your noise." Tamsin made a sound, not quite a laugh. "You want our work calendar?" "Yes," said the drone. "We will avoid resonance events. We will return afterward to index the quiet shaped by your noise. We will call it the Foreman Protocol." Gabe looked at the machine statue. He looked at the drone. He looked at the culvert that had become his ally. He lifted the sledge slowly and set it on his shoulder the way a man does when he is not done building. "You're learning," he said. "Yes," said the drone. "Your structures are thorny, your harmonics are elegant." "Not elegant," Gabe shook his head, "human." The drone considered this, which was a funny thing to watch a piece of hovering geometry do. "We will learn human," it said. "We will learn to leave space for your noise." "Good," Gabe said. "In return, we'll try to keep the noise on schedule." "Accepted," said the drone. It left with the easy slanting grace of a gull finding a wind line. It skimmed the top of the Basalt Guardian and made a small, respectful tone, like the chime you get when an elevator stops at your floor. "Did we just negotiate with aliens?" Tamsin asked. "Looked a lot like a pre-construction meeting to me," Gabe said. "Reminder, send sign-in sheet." Noah had the phone out, cheeks pink with excitement. "I think you should be on the plaque too," he told Gabe. "It was your swing." Gabe shook his head. "It was our yard," he said. He looked at the culvert again and felt absurdly proud of a pipe. News crawled back into the district like cautious sunlight. Not official channels at first. The official channels had been busy elsewhere, but the human web, texts and calls and shaky videos posted by people who refused to believe the only true story was the one beamed into their heads. They watched the video of the old foreman playing the monster like a bell. They poked at the edges of the story to see if it held. Some said it had to be a trick. Some said it had to be divine. Most said, "Huh. That's a pretty good hammer." Within a week, Representatives from 3 different agencies and 2 different universities had come to watch Gabe demonstrate his technique. He tried to tell them there was no technique, not really. There was listening, mostly. There was the understanding that every structure is a conversation between forces, and you can join the conversation if you speak with your whole body. A woman from a foundation that funded resilient infrastructure asked if she could record him while he talked through his thinking. "I'm not great at talking while doing," he said, and she smiled and said that was okay. They had learned to talk while building too. Tamsin became the interpreter. She translated his hip-centered arc and his eye for load paths into little diagrams and thoughtful bullet points. She printed a sign and taped it to the trailer wall above the coffee maker. "Don't hit harder, hum smarter." Noah added a drawing of the Basalt Guardian with big friendly eyes and a construction cone on its head. Tamsin added a cartoon speech bubble. "Consider the load path." People laughed, and then stopped laughing because it was a serious point. Gabe felt a little foolish standing in front of the Guardian with a group of people who had more degrees between them than the crane had angles. And yet, when the wind threaded the rebar stacks and the crane's hook coughed a small chime, the gathered faces turned toward him and waited for his explanation. "It's not magic," he said. "It's leverage. Not just the lever you can hold, leverage in time, too. You put the right vibration into a thing for long enough, it will move the way you want. But you don't get there by force. You get there by standing in the right place and using everything that wants to sing anyway." A professor nodded, eyes bright, phase locking. "Bless you," Gabe said. He would have liked this to be the end of the story. The enemy tamed by an old man's patience, the aliens converted by the gospel of scheduling. But the world did not stop throwing new problems just because one problem had been neatly framed. 2 weeks after the Foreman protocol began, 2 weeks in which the cartographers stayed out of active work zones, and the crews stayed mostly out of theirs, another Sentinel woke in a different part of the city where there was no Gabe Rook and no culvert tuned to his ear. The people there ran, because running was the tool they had. The video came to Gabe through a friend of a friend. A beast of slate and graphite, different shape, different seam glow, moving with loose-jointed slowness through a market where awnings flapped like frightened birds. The Sentinel's claws made delicate, careful arcs over fruit baskets and still knocked them down. The noise didn't look hostile, but the noise didn't know where to stand. "They didn't send us the schedule," Tamsin said, teeth clenched with anger. "Or the city didn't tell us. Or nobody thought the Foreman protocol was for them. Or we need to do more than wait for an invitation," Gabe said, and he felt the old push in his ribs, the one that had kept him working past his 55th birthday and then his 65th. The push that said, if you know how to fix something and you don't, that's a kind of lie. They loaded the truck. They brought the spreader bar and the hoist control and a battered generator with a stubborn pull cord. Gabe checked the sledge handle for hairline cracks, ran his palm along the wood as if greeting an old horse. "Road trip?" Noah asked, hiding his fear under bravado that Gabe recognized from his own childhood. "Site visit," Gabe said. "We'll keep it under the speed limit." They drove through neighborhoods that were not empty, not anymore. People had returned to the edges like weeds that know better than to wait for permission. The survey spires hummed quietly in the river fog. The drone, blue seems polite, kept pace above them like an escort that honored another jurisdiction. At the market, they found the Sentinel paused in the middle of a street whose stones had been set by hand long before there were trucks to carry stone. Its head turned slowly as if listening. People were huddled behind a row of kiosks. A man in an orange safety vest waved them down furiously. "You can't be here," he said, "whoever you are." "Foreman Rook," Gabe said, and watched the recognition light the man's face like a dawn. "We brought a bell." The market didn't have a culvert. It didn't have rebar stacks or pre-stressed tendons. It had awnings and racks of clothing and stalls of spices that made the rain smell like stories. It had wooden posts that had stood for 60 years and some that had stood for 200. It had a narrow alley that might act like a waveguide if tapped with the right angle. Tamsin looked around with the quick measuring eye she had earned since the Basalt Guardian night. "That arch," she said, pointing. "The old one. If you stand there and aim the note through the arcade." She traced a shape in the air with her finger. Gabe nodded. "We're not going to break any stone we don't have to." "Promise," said the man in the orange vest. He looked like he wanted to believe promise accounting could work in both directions today. "Promise," Gabe said. They set the spreader on an angle against the arch and anchored it with ropes around columns that had last served that purpose when horses still pulled. The generator coughed awake. The hoist control clunked into a setting. Tamsin had improvised that threw just enough mass into just enough motion to create a movable resonance they could sweep through a space. Gabe took his stance. The Sentinel listened. "Hey," he said to it, because politeness never cost you anything you couldn't afford. "We're going to talk. You're going to hear us." He began to swing, gentle as if coaxing a skittish animal toward a bucket of grain. The first few notes were exploratory, low, wobbly, the kind a singer uses to find the key. The arch returned them with a delicious little echo. He changed his footing, sending the next note higher, then higher still until the market's stones seemed to hum along. He found the alley's sweet spot and sent the tone into it like a letter slid under a door. The Sentinel seams brightened. Its feet shifted, taking a thoughtful step that unstacked a row of grocery baskets but didn't shatter the fruit. He swept the note back down and then up again, feeling like a man pushing and pulling a boat off a sandbar. Tamsin watched his hips and adjusted the generator's load in tiny mouse nibbles of changes that made the tone sharpen or soften. The shutter opened. The amber heart showed. He didn't go for it. Not yet. He had learned something in the yard. Not every open gate should be charged through. Sometimes what you do first is show you can go through and then decide not to, so the thing you are talking to understands that you can choose. "Foreman protocol," he said, still swinging. "We need a schedule here." The drone, blue seams, courteous, descended through the rain and hovered at the edge of the Sentinel's sightline. "Schedule accepted," it said, almost before he finished. "We did not have an operator here." "You do now," Gabe said, and he let the next note fall like a hand on a shoulder. The Sentinel went still. Its seams dimmed as if in thought. The drone's tone took on that hush permit quality again. Human harmonics registered, working window granted. The humans behind the kiosks unfolded themselves like flowers after a storm. Some cried, some laughed, some gathered broken baskets because a mess is a mess regardless of the cause. The man in the vest wiped his face and shook Gabe's hand until their elbows clicked. "Thank you," the man said. "Thank you. You saved a lot of old wood today." "We like old wood," Gabe said. "Old wood is load-tested." They made it back to the truck in time for the rain to change from nails to thread, and then to mist. The drone kept up with them for a few blocks, and then peeled away with the casual confidence of a colleague stepping into her own meeting. "You know this can't be our job forever," Tamsin said softly as they drove. "You and me, we can't be everywhere." "I know," Gabe said. "We write it down, we teach it. We put it in hands that want it, not because it's heroic, because it's a trade." Noah stared out the window, then said, quietly and with a seriousness older than 8 years, "Is this what humans do?" Gabe thought of Old Man Rook's hands on his, turning his feet toward the swing. He thought of the thousands of hammers in all the worlds that would never get famous because they didn't need to be. "Sometimes," he said, "when we're lucky." Months grew in the city the way ivy finds a wall, not as a single motion but as a patient pressure that becomes beautiful because it didn't ask permission. The Foreman protocol became paperwork and then policy and then, for a while, culture. The cartographers learned to post their schedules alongside the city. The crews learned to file their harmonics with the drones, which developed a taste for coffee and powdered donuts, because somebody in an office thought it was funny to add a tiny heating element and a scent emitter to the chassis, so they didn't seem so alien while waiting at job sites. The Sentinels woke less often. When they did, they woke with a courtesy they had not possessed before. They placed their claws carefully. They opened their shutters to show their amber hearts not as targets but as shared confidences. If the city needed to hum loud for a while, the drones would make a space for it. If the cartographers needed quiet to hear the bedrock's old stories, the city would keep a beat that cooperated. People came to see the Basalt Guardian. They set their hands on it the way you set your hand on the shoulder of a sleeping giant and hope you are friends. They read the plaque and stood back and looked at the culvert with new respect. Teenagers tried to play it like a drum and learned quickly why don't hit harder, hum smarter was a rule. A busking violinist found the arch's sweet spot at the market and made a living demonstrating harmony to tourists and drones. On Sundays, Gabe sometimes came down to the yard when it was quiet and stood with his hand on the sledge's head and looked at the crane like a friend lounging against a doorway. Tamsin would show up with coffee. Noah would wander over to the Guardian and tell it, matter-of-factly, what he had seen that week at school. "You're famous," Tamsin said once, grinning. "Your hammer has its own fan page." Gabe grunted, "It's just a hammer." "Don't let the hammer hear you say that," she said. "Hammers have feelings now. Aliens gave them to us in a firmware update." He laughed, and the laugh came from deep in his chest. The laugh said, "I will not live forever, and that is no tragedy." It said, "I have been allowed to swing the right tool at the right moment, and that is enough." Sometimes the voice of the cartographers reached out gently, not to command but to ask. "Human Foreman, there is a ridge beyond the river that hums in a pattern we cannot decode. It was made before your recorded time. Will you come listen?" He went. He stood on the ridge with the drone humming at his shoulder and the wind trying to lift his cap off his head. He tapped the stones with his knuckles, with the heel of his hand, with the head of the sledge when he carried it up for show. He listened. He told the cartographers this wasn't just a ridge. It was a wall. They said it this way to talk to the wind. The cartographers listened, and for the first time their voice carried a hint of something like wonder. "Your ancestors made maps in air." "Everyone makes maps," he said. "You're making one now that includes coffee breaks." "We have scheduled joy," the voice said, with pride a little too earnest for a joke. "That's the best kind," Gabe said. On the anniversary of the night the Guardian was made, someone, no one ever found out who, hung a wreath of rebar ties on the machine's wrist like a bracelet. Someone else set a hard hat on the claw. The hat was too small and looked ridiculous, which is to say, it looked perfectly right. Tamsin took a picture of the three of them, the old foreman, the apprentice with her hard-earned calluses, and the kid with his wolfish grin. Behind them, the Guardian leaned politely, as if listening for the next instruction. "What do you hear?" Tamsin asked, because she knew he always heard something. Gabe tilted his head. The rain had held off, but the air carried that pre-storm taste of iron. Far away, the river hummed. Nearby, the crane's cables clicked softly against the boom. Above them, a drone, blue seams, friendly, looped a lazy circle like a kite that had learned its own tricks. "I hear work," he said. "I hear a city making up its mind. I hear aliens who learn to schedule joy." "And you?" he asked her, not turning it into a lesson but a check-in. She closed her eyes and listened. "I hear the quiet between notes, the part that lets you hear the song." "Good," he said softly. "That's where we live." They went to check the pumps. They adjusted a valve. They argued gently about the best order to do the day's checks and compromised happily because the argument was how you got to good. Noah ran ahead to the trailer to get the donuts before the drones did. Gabe settled his cap more firmly and looked at the Guardian and said, in the privacy of his working heart, "Thank you for wanting to be an argument I could win without anyone losing." If the Guardian heard, it said nothing. It stood there and let the city hum around it. It had forgotten how to hurt, and that was as close to redemption as a machine needed.